In April 1945, the central apparatus of the Third Reich collapsed. The institutional structure vanished. The historical focus shifted to the wives of the top leadership trapped at the epicenter of the disaster. They expected perpetual security inside expropriated estates. They received military interrogations and total destruction. For a decade, the families of the high command constituted a strictly separate social stratum. They resided in the requisitioned villas of Dahlem and Grunewald. This specific caste remained completely isolated from the wartime rationing system. While ordinary German citizens survived on strict allocations of 1,500 calories a day, the elite bypassed all food deficits. Dedicated supply networks delivered provisions directly to their doors until the final weeks. They operated as conscious beneficiaries of the regime. Then their social immunity evaporated. The front line shifted into the residential sectors. Muffled explosions of Soviet artillery shells breached the perimeter. The heavy detonations interrupted the quiet of the empty government mansions. Crystal glasses from past victory toasts stood abandoned on dining tables. The women gathered essential documents. They evacuated their homes on foot. The transition from the untouchable ruling class to isolated fugitives occurred in a matter of hours. By the final week of April, military command officially reclassified the civilian sectors of Berlin as an active combat zone. While the urban infrastructure disintegrated above, a distinct procedural routine continued underground. Inside the isolation of the bunker, Magda Goebbels methodically prepared her 6 children for elimination. How do you maintain the illusion of normality hours before murdering your own offspring? Magda Goebbels continued to wash and press their garments daily. The 6 children ranged in age from 4 to 12 years. Their mother enforced strict domestic discipline within the narrow concrete corridors. She scrubbed their faces, she combed their hair, she folded their linens. Magda prepared these clean, freshly ironed nightgowns specifically for their execution. On May 1, 1945, this household management reached its calculated endpoint. The liquidation procedure operated with clinical precision. Magda washed the children one final time. She dressed them in the crisp white fabric. Then, the regime deployed its state resources. SS. Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger, an official medical professional, administered a liquid sleeping medication. The children quickly lost consciousness in their identical beds. The mother then moved methodically from child to child. She inserted a cyanide capsule between each child's teeth. She pressed their jaws firmly shut. The thin glass ampules crunched loudly inside the mouths of the sleeping children. The utilization of official medical personnel like SS Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger to eliminate a private family demonstrated a harsh structural reality. The Nazi hierarchy completely institutionalized death. Ideological protocol smoothly overrode fundamental maternal biology. With the children dead, the parents concluded the sequence. Magda and Joseph Goebbels walked up the concrete stairs into the ruined Chancellery Garden. They committed suicide. Bunker personnel immediately doused their bodies with petrol and set the remains on fire. While fire consumed the remains in the Reich Chancellery Garden, the capital's municipal infrastructure suffered total collapse. Soviet artillery units delivered constant barrages. Heavy shells impacted residential sectors every 3 minutes. By the last week of April 1945, the Red Army systematically dismantled the urban grid. Water mains shattered. Power distribution stopped. Food rationing failed. Civilians retreated into unlit subterranean basements to survive the complete eradication of their daily environment. Below this destruction, the architectural reality shifted. The Führerbunker functioned as a hermetically sealed operational center. Reinforced concrete walls up to 3 meters thick formed an absolute defensive perimeter. This specific engineering created a physical barrier, completely isolating the political leadership from the ongoing social catastrophe of the civilian population. The underground facility maintained independent diesel generators and active air filtration systems. The elite occupied a self-sustaining structural module. Inside this controlled space, the Supreme Command detached entirely from external conditions. Hitler processed delayed military reports and directed non-existent military divisions. His psychological breakdowns occurred strictly within these narrow corridors, insulated from the civilian reality above. The architectural separation remained absolute. The city ceased to exist. Inside this hermetic concrete structure, entirely detached from the urban destruction above, state bureaucracy maintained its standard operations. On April 29, 1945, a municipal magistrate conducted a routine civil marriage ceremony. Staff procured standard government forms. Officials verified personal identities. Eva Braun acquired legal marital status. Martin Bormann signed the paperwork as a formal witness. The administrative apparatus meticulously processed a civilian wedding. The immediate collapse of the national infrastructure did not interrupt the bureaucratic schedule. Legal protocol dictated the subsequent steps. The dictation of a political testament followed immediately. Secretaries typed the final official documents. The regime legally transferred liability for the military defeat to army commanders. 24 hours elapsed. April 30th. The institutional sequence concluded. The couple entered a private study. Braun consumed a cyanide capsule. A single gunshot terminated the procedure. Subordinates executed prearranged logistical orders. Aides wrapped the corpses in military blankets and carried the remains up the concrete stairs. In the Reich Chancellery Garden, the rapid cremation commenced. A thick mixture of gasoline and weapon powder saturated the air. The distance to the advancing Soviet troops was 10 meters. The 3-meter concrete walls vibrated. Soviet tank treads ground against the pavement directly overhead. Just beyond the burning crater where the dictator's remains turned to ash, the defense perimeter completely collapsed. The underground shelter on Wilhelmstrasse ceased to function as a military command center. What happens to a headquarters when artillery severs the last telephone cable? It turns into a concrete mass grave. Dust and cordite choked the ventilation system. Food rations vanished. Fresh air became a rare commodity. In the communications room, rows of black telephone sets sat entirely dead. They severed the bunker from the outside world. Radio operators transmitted nothing. Central coordination evaporated. Officers no longer drafted tactical orders. Some paced the corridors in silence. Others swallowed cyanide. While isolated commanders wandered the halls in shock, the architectural fortress designed to protect the political elite simply locked them underground. By the 2nd of May, General Helmut Weitling officially surrendered the city garrison. The isolation became absolute. Soviet artillery reduced the surface of Wilhelmstrasse to a landscape of pulverized brick and destroyed armor. The infrastructure of the Third Reich ceased to exist. The internal life support systems failed completely. Above ground, Soviet soldiers hoisted their flag over the ruined Reichstag. General Hans-Georg von Friedeberg's wife killed herself just hours after a public broadcast. British military logs never even recorded her first name. Her social identity existed solely as an extension of the state. The regime vanished. The capitulation signed on May 3, 1945 by her husband triggered a systemic chain reaction. Suicides swept through the wives of the highest officer corps. When the hierarchy collapsed, their lives lost all institutional value. The catalyst was his signature. The official naval surrender document lay finalized on a wooden desk in Kiel. General von Friedeberg, operating under Admiral Karl Donitz, handed the entire Kriegsmarine over to British forces. Military doctrine strictly governed these domestic structures. Status was everything. A total loss of rank equaled immediate physical termination. 20 days later, on May 23rd, the general mirrored his wife's decision and ingested poison. Military police processed the corpse. British authorities transferred his unredacted dossier to Allied war crimes investigators. Allied investigators required written evidence. While naval wives consumed poison in Kiel, Lena Heydrich systematically destroyed her documentary connection to the SS apparatus. She sorted the personal papers of Reinhard Heydrich. She isolated the operational Gestapo files. The acrid smell of burning government archives choked her domestic fireplace. She incinerated bureaucratic records alongside standard household correspondence. Lena recognized the legal threat. She occupied an estate in Fiechten. The state paid her a widow pension. These financial assets functioned as direct economic dividends from the Holocaust architecture her husband established in Prague during 1942. Czech resistance groups actively hunted former administrators across the border. Soviet military units advanced steadily toward the southern sector. Surviving documents guaranteed an arrest. She abandoned the property. She packed her children. They bypassed the regional transit camps and traveled directly to the Baltic coast. Lena discarded her elite political identity to blend into the civilian population. The family vanished on Femmern. The detainment of Margaret Speer by American troops in Stendal launched a massive Allied pursuit network. Northeast of Magdeburg, the legal framework shifted. Why did American investigators detain wives holding no official posts? They were treated as carriers of critical institutional memory. United States 9th Army units surrounded the property. Sharp military commands in English broke the domestic silence of the German residents. Soldiers entered the house. They secured the rooms. Officers initiated standard detainment protocols. United States Army personnel physically separated the mother from her 6 children. They isolated the minors. Investigators commenced a systematic search of the premises. Intelligence officers emptied drawers. They cataloged every document linked to Albert Speer. The action signaled a definitive change in Allied jurisprudence. Relatives of high-ranking officials lost their civilian immunity. Military administration processed them as institutional assets. They became primary intelligence targets. Military police transferred Marguerite to an interrogation center. Questioning focused on the Ministry of Armaments and War Production. Interrogators demanded operational data. She refused compliance. She maintained absolute silence for 24 hours. In May 1945, the town of Demmin recorded the suicides of 900 civilians within a few days. This mass self-destruction fundamentally altered Allied operational protocols. 900 dead in one municipality. Why did officers' wives kill their own children? The fear of advancing troops merely triggered the reaction, while the true cause was the absolute collapse of their social identity. Status vanished. For the elite, the end of the regime meant the immediate erasure of their institutional existence. The mechanics of death followed rigid, deliberate patterns. Before taking their lives, families systematically destroyed their material wealth. The acrid smell of burning upholstery and scorched documents filled the residential streets. Then came the end. Mothers administered cyanide capsules to their infants. Entire households waded into the deep currents of the Peene River with heavy stones tied to their waists. Those lacking chemical agents simply barricaded their doors and ignited their own houses. They died together. The statistical data confirms the extreme scale of this sociological anomaly. Demmin maintained a pre-war population of roughly 15,000 residents. Erasing 900 lives equaled a sudden 6% demographic loss in less than 72 hours. This was not mere panic. This was pure ideological fatalism. Elite women viewed survival under Allied jurisdiction as unacceptable social degradation. Germany officially surrendered on May 8, 1945. While hundreds of civilian women drowned themselves in the Peene River, Emmy Goering resided in the Austrian Alps. In June 1945, she occupied Fischhorn Castle, valleys filled with mass graves of ordinary citizens. The highest elite awaited occupation in absolute comfort. The SS utilized this fortress as a secure depository. It held looted art from across occupied Europe. Emmy lived among stolen masterpieces. She retained her luxury wardrobe. The reality of a collapsed state did not reach her altitude. Then Allied units arrived. Soldiers arrested her. Hermann Goering surrendered to the military command soon after. The occupation authorities confiscated her property immediately. They seized her assets. They stripped her of all extreme social privileges. Investigators separated Emmy from her daughter for several months. Her status evaporated. Former subordinates refused to acknowledge her presence. Society labeled the former First Lady of the Reich as a common criminal. Authorities released her in 1948. She possessed zero social capital. The government transferred her to Munich and placed her under permanent surveillance. Western authorities dismantled elite status through strict legal procedures. Surveillance, tribunals. The methodology in the Soviet occupation zone diverged completely. Female relatives of SS officers faced immediate physical stigmatization. Militias and citizens bypassed military courts entirely. Soldiers extracted women from their residences. Crowds formed in the ruined streets. The sharp, metallic click of scissors echoed over the mob as residents publicly sheared the women's hair. Civilians stripped them, struck them, and transferred them to Soviet guards. Legal frameworks collapsed. The Soviet military administration refused these demographics prisoner of war status. Occupying forces suspended all standard international conventions for non-combatants across the sector. Locals categorized the women as active hostile elements. The hatred often surpassed the anger directed at deceased male officials. While international prosecutors prepared formal legal indictments for the Nuremberg trials, the Eastern territories functioned on absolute extrajudicial retribution. Municipal authorities documented nothing. State archives contain exactly zero official records of these spontaneous civilian reprisals. While street reprisals left no paperwork, the Soviet state apparatus operated with cold bureaucratic precision. Soldiers arrested Hedwig Rosenberg in Königsberg in May 1945. What did arrest mean for the wife of the party's chief ideologist? Standard judicial detention did not apply here. It meant complete geographical and social erasure of the past. Her husband, Alfred Rosenberg, sat in American custody. He authored The Myth of the 20th Century in 1930. His text formulated the explicit ideological framework for the genocide policy in the Eastern Territories. Soviet authorities extracted the cost directly from his family. Armed convoys transported Hedwig far beyond Poland into the deep interior. Guards locked the heavy steel door. They pushed her inside. Bare concrete walls absorbed the freezing cold, while military personnel strictly denied all requests for physical examinations or basic medical treatment. Wardens provided only minimal rations. For over 2 years, state security maintained continuous daily surveillance over her isolation. Authorities authorized her release in 1947. She had nowhere to go. The Soviet administration had structurally dismantled her entire previous reality. Officials annexed her native Königsberg, forcibly deported the remaining German residents, and permanently renamed the geographic region Kaliningrad. The city no longer existed. While the Soviet administration erased Eastern geography and isolated figures like Hedwig Rosenberg in cold detention, the Western Allies initiated a different sweep. They wanted hidden capital. On May 8, 1945, the European conflict ended. The financial investigation began immediately. Allied powers targeted the families of SS officers. Wives of high-ranking functionaries still occupied remote estates and alpine chalets across the occupation zones. They lived among looted wealth. Now, the military authorities reclassified them entirely. The approach was strictly pragmatic. Investigators identified these women as primary intelligence nodes. They knew the geographic coordinates of stolen property. They controlled shadow accounts and hidden family assets. The military government activated a precise administrative protocol to secure this data. They applied the automatic arrest category to all individuals connected to the Supreme SS leadership. Spouses lost their civilian privileges instantly. They became operational targets. Allied intelligence agencies officially registered hundreds of these women onto lists of essential witnesses. The Western bureaucratic apparatus required an immediate test subject. United States troops located Ilse Hess in southern Bavaria in late May 1945. Her husband had served as the highest deputy of the regime until his unauthorized flight to Scotland in 1941. That mission failed. He sat in a British cell. She maintained her influence within high-ranking social networks. Investigators found no grounds for direct war crimes indictments. Yet military administrators classified her as a persistent ideological threat. Upon her release from detention, occupational authorities initiated a systematic dismantling of her civil status, replacing extreme privilege with total civic paralysis. Heavy ink stamps of the military government marked her official clearance documents. The legal restrictions were absolute. She lost the right to own land. She lost the right to publish political texts. The administration explicitly banned her from speaking at public events. The objective was complete social erasure. Stripping property and voice guaranteed the collapse of her former status. This containment strategy extended beyond the primary targets. Intelligence officers established permanent surveillance over her children. To manage targets like Ilse Hess, the United States Army activated a massive network of detention centers. By the summer of 1945, primary compounds in Augsburg and Regensburg operated at full capacity. British forces utilized holding sites across Lower Saxony. French intelligence secured facilities in Metz and Strasbourg. Commanders standardized the processing infrastructure. Bad Nauheim exemplified this transformation. Before the war, it functioned as an exclusive luxury resort for European aristocracy. Now, American military police requisitioned the grand hotels for mass interrogations. Detainees underwent immediate physical equalization. Guards confiscated tailored silk dresses and luxury personal effects. Quartermasters issued standard institutional uniforms. The rough, abrasive texture of basic canvas replaced fine fabrics. Women who previously directed domestic staff now scrubbed floors under strict military directives. Months prior, these women occupied requisitioned estates. They commanded forced laborers as private maids. Now, orders were absolute. They faced solitary confinement and strict compliance with armed guards. The Allied Directive Joint Chiefs of Staff 1067 mandated the automatic arrest of anyone presenting a security threat. This included the wives of the High Command. Denazification tribunals systematically seized their remaining assets. Former social circles dissolved. Estates vanished. Release from these camps did not mean freedom. It meant transitioning into a new category of civic isolation. Their names populated extensive blacklists. Regional police monitored their daily routines. How do you legally destroy elite status? The military government implemented a permanent solution. Authorities banned them from teaching, owning commercial enterprises, and crossing district boundaries without formal authorization. For these women, the number of voting and public employment rights remaining upon release was exactly 0. In June 1945, American military police transported Elsa von Greifenberg to a camp near Munich. Her husband, SS General Karl Wolff, was already conducting secret negotiations with United States intelligence. He brokered the surrender of German forces in northern Italy through Operation Sunrise. This diplomatic maneuver immediately triggered severe geopolitical friction. Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin openly suspected a secret separate peace agreement between Washington and the German command. The domestic routine of a Nazi spouse suddenly intersected with global espionage. Allied investigators assumed Elsa possessed strategic data. During interrogations, she claimed strict adherence to household duties. She denied political involvement, but archived documents contradicted her statements. The records confirmed her regular attendance at elite SS functions and close personal ties with top command families. Neutrality proved impossible. Prosecutors filed no formal war crime charges against her. However, the military administration firmly denied her return to the family estate. Occupation forces confiscated her property completely. Expropriation was absolute. A housewife status provided no legal protection against total financial ruin. Karl Wolff leveraged his intelligence cooperation to avoid execution. Authorities approved his release from prison in the early 1950s. The couple retreated to a quiet existence in Bavaria. They lived in strict isolation from state affairs, former political networks, and media scrutiny. Elsa passed away in the early 1970s. The public simply forgot her. The Nuremberg courtroom projected archival footage of the concentration camps. Simultaneously, Heinrich Himmler's widow drafted official testimonies in a nearby facility. Margaret Himmler documented her absolute certainty that her husband remained a decent man. U.S. military investigators placed operational records on the interrogation table. Documents detailed the mechanics of the SS extermination network. The heavy mechanical strikes of the typewriter echoed across the American isolation ward. The interrogators expected a psychological collapse at the sight of the evidence. They anticipated at least a partial admission of systemic guilt. Instead, they received a signed declaration of complete cognitive isolation. Margaret ignored the photographs. She picked up a pen. She drafted a formal statement of absolute ignorance. She signed the paper. Her husband had committed suicide in May 1945. He left her the social legacy of the Third Reich. During the war, her privileged household operated on a strict financial model. That exceptional standard of living relied directly on the expropriated assets of SS victims. She consumed stolen wealth. Now, she categorically denied its origin. Allied authorities found no legal basis for permanent detention. They released her in early 1946. The post-war society immediately expelled her from the public sphere. German civilians mailed threats. Anti-Nazi groups monitored her location. Margarita altered her name. She retreated into permanent domestic confinement. Neighbors rarely noticed her presence. She maintained her structural denial for 2 decades. She died in 1967. No newspaper published an obituary. The mass denial of guilt collided with a strict sociological shift. After the main tribunals concluded in 1946, the elite status of the Third Reich dissolved into total isolation. Divided Germany lay in physical and economic ruin. The civilian population systematically rejected the former leadership circle. Neighbors turned away. Local businesses refused them employment. What was the economic survival strategy of this displaced class? The options remained critically scarce. Lena Heydrich monetized her remaining capital, opening a small guest house on the island of Fehmarn. The structural contrast was absolute. Reinhard Heydrich had orchestrated the Wannsee Conference. That specific protocol launched the industrial extermination of millions. Now, his widow's primary administrative concern was managing rural tourist accommodations. The local population actively boycotted her property. Provincial schools socially excluded her children. This systemic blockade remained impenetrable until her death in 1985. She maintained strict ideological rigidity. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, she routinely sat before recording equipment and gave extensive interviews justifying her husband's orders. While Lena Heydrich built her northern guest house, Emmy Goering remained trapped at the epicenter of American justice, Nuremberg. Military police confined her to a secure house just blocks from the tribunal. Complete physical proximity, absolute legal exclusion. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors projected footage of the camps. Outside, Emmy paced the perimeter. She wore dark, closed clothing. Large sunglasses hid her face from reporters and civilians. She repeatedly demanded to see her husband. Authorities denied every request. She wrote letters. Censors intercepted the envelopes. The system erased her from the process. On October 1, 1946, the judges read the death sentence. Nobody informed her directly. The tribunal owed no explanations to the families of the accused. She only learned the truth weeks later, when her husband crushed a glass vial of cyanide in his cell. He swallowed the poison hours before his scheduled hanging on October 15th. Goering removed himself from the judicial infrastructure. Rudolf Hess did not. His prolonged incarceration catalyzed a different sociological reaction. How did isolation influence the political views of the elite's female circle? Ilse Hess integrated into far-right publishing networks to rehabilitate her husband. By the early 1950s, she authored systematic defenses of the former regime. Her articles circulated in nationalist magazines. She demanded immediate intervention. Spandau Prison accommodated exactly 7 high-ranking officials. Functionally, this isolated facility became a symbolic center of crystallization for post-war neo-Nazi cells. Ilse Hess utilized this ideological focal point. State authorities officially banned her from physical political assemblies. She bypassed these restrictions through extensive written correspondence. Her operations persisted for decades. They only ceased with her death in 1995. Other surviving spouses utilized geographic marginalization for survival. Social rejection dictated strict behavioral protocols. Widows legally altered their surnames. They abandoned urban centers. Many relocated to remote rural zones to evade demographic tracking and systemic suspicion. Reintegration failed. Previous administrative status guaranteed permanent economic poverty and constant government surveillance. The path back to society was closed. Ilse Hess utilized nationalist publications to contest her husband's detention. Margaret Speer accepted a different reality. She adapted to a 20-year sentence. The prison protocol strictly excluded minors. The administration banned children from attending the brief visitation sessions. Margaret walked into the Spandau visitor zone. The secure room possessed sterile, echoic acoustics. Every word resonated against the bare walls. Allied soldiers monitored the entire interaction. The conversation remained strictly formal. The administration explicitly forbade any political discourse. Spandau confined only 7 inmates. The facility's maintenance cost the Allies millions of dollars annually, transforming every spousal visit into a strictly documented, highly regulated state operation. After the allotted time, she returned to Heidelberg. The subsequent decades demanded raising her children in absolute social isolation. West German authorities maintained systematic surveillance over her household. Albert's partial admission of guilt at Nuremberg provided no local immunity. The stigma persisted. Financial resources remained severely restricted. The sentence concluded in 1966. Albert Speer re-entered society. He published detailed memoirs. Margaret maintained total public absence. She granted 0 interviews. She avoided all media contact. Even after his death, her routine remained completely unchanged. Margaret Speer died in Heidelberg in 1987. The strict social isolation of aging mothers in Heidelberg and Munich forced a systemic rupture. The next generation actively severed all domestic ties. What was the demographic outcome for the families of the High Command? Mass surname changes and immediate flight to other continents. The biological heirs of the regime systematically erased their historical identities. They altered birth records. Agencies issued new passports. Families relocated across the ocean. To secure a completely new existence, descendants utilized legal commercial routes to the United States, Canada, and South America. This legal demographic shift geographically mirrored a darker historical precedent. Their legitimate transatlantic passenger flights perfectly tracked the illegal rat lines that fugitive SS officers previously operated. The cultural annihilation was absolute. They chose voluntary oblivion. Time finalized the demographic erasure. By the end of the 20th century, almost 0 wives of the highest leadership remained alive. The state authorized exactly 0 monuments. German society systematically purged their final traces from the public record. The burial proceeded without a public funeral. No state presence, no crowds. The children who emigrated across the Atlantic left their mothers behind to face total institutional asset confiscation. Emmy Goering navigated this exact material collapse. Allied tribunals executed complete property seizures. Investigators confiscated sprawling private estates, diamond reserves, and vast art collections. Goering relocated to a cramped Munich apartment. The tight square footage and low ceilings formed a severe spatial contrast to her previous manners. She existed completely devoid of steady income. In the early 1950s, she tried to leverage her history. She drafted detailed memoirs. Publishers universally rejected the manuscripts. The literary market branded her with a permanent exclusionary identifier. The explicit label of Nazi actress functioned as an impenetrable commercial barrier. The post-war economy locked her out. She avoided societal engagement. She delivered 0 interviews. The ultimate economic degradation of a formerly untouchable class concluded in absolute obscurity. The system registered her final breath on June 8, 1973.